Welcome to Around the SEC, the show where everything just means more. I'm Micah Farmer.
I'm Maddie Bond.
And we are finally back after a long offseason. The transfer portal was crazier than ever, and in big news, Texas and Oklahoma have joined the SEC, which gives us a new layer to a conference that was already one of the best, if not the best, in college football. But this week, we're going to dive into teams that we think might be sleepers, some teams we think might underachieve. We're going to give some game picks, as well as who we think is going to end up in Atlanta for the conference championship game at the end of the year. So, Maddie, you ready to get going?
I'm so excited.
All right, so we're going to start with a team that we think will be the biggest sleeper in the conference this year. This isn't necessarily we're saying Vanderbilt's going to go undefeated, but just someone you might not have your eye on right now that we think could end up doing pretty well. So, Maddie, who is on your radar?
I think Tennessee could be a huge contender this season. They're coming off an 8-4 season last year, and it's going into year 4 with Coach Josh Heupel. And they've got quarterback Nico. He's from Long Beach, California. Very good physical build, 6'6", 215. It's his second season with the Vols. Last year, he put up 314 passing yards with 71 rushing. I do think he's got a great mobility game, and this will be game-changing in order of keeping plays alive and keeping the defense on their toes.
Yeah, I like Nico a lot. He is a solid quarterback. We saw it in the Iowa Bowl game, had a great performance there. The receivers on the outside for him are still good as well, and Squirrel White and Brew McCoy. And then my favorite player on this Tennessee team is on the other side of the ball, actually off the edge, in James Pierce.
Yes.
He could go number 1 in the NFL draft this season. So if the talent all comes together, I think this could be a very solid Tennessee team. I completely agree with that. However, my sleeper is going to be the Florida Gators this year. And I know that might be a little crazy looking at what they have on their schedule this season, but if the Gators can get this talent going, I think there's a lot of potential in this team. You look at the offensive talent, especially Graham Mertz coming back was probably a top 6 or 7 quarterback in the SEC last year. Did lose Trevor Etienne to Georgia, but Montreal Johnson is still there as a great player. The receiver core got even better, getting Chimera Dyke from Wisconsin, Elijah Badger from Arizona State, and obviously the star and returner Eugene Wilson. Offensive line is great. The questions are on the defensive side, though. I think anyone that watched Florida last year would see that that's kind of the case. The run defense is abysmal, and the pass defense might have been worse. So we'll see if the Gators can get the defense better, but we'll have a very quick way to find out with week 1 as Miami travels down to Gainesville.
Who do you think your disappointment team is going to be this year?
Well, my disappointment team is actually Georgia, and that might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I just think this is the year that the off-the-field stuff catches up with Georgia. You can only keep running this style of program where you have all the arrests, the reckless driving, stuff like that, and it not catch up to you on the field at some point. You've had a bunch of transfers out. I still think this is a great team in terms of talent, but I don't think it's going to be enough this year to have just pure talent and no discipline on this Georgia roster. I think they could drop week 1 to Clemson. I think they probably lose at Ole Miss, at Texas, and at Alabama. So that's maybe an 8-4 Georgia team, and I think we would all agree that would be a pretty big disappointment for the Bulldogs.
Yes, I've got my money on Oklahoma. They're just now joining the SEC. They were pretty good last season, but they've got one of the toughest schedules this season, including their first games of the season being LSU, Missouri, and Alabama. If they cannot survive the first games of the season, there's no way they can afford a few losses later in the season to hopefully secure them a spot in the SEC championship or a playoff game.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough schedule for the Sooners for sure. Jackson Arnold coming in, taking the place of Dylan Gabriel, who has transferred out to Oregon. It's going to be a big test for him leading that offense. I think Brent Venables is a great coach. I think he'll have that defense even more improved as we come into this year. I just, like you said, I don't know that there's the top-end talent on this Oklahoma team, and if they do drop some of those games to a Missouri, to an LSU, I don't think they're going to have much success in this conference doing that. But those are some teams you think might let you down a little bit as we head through this season. Now it's time to talk about the big game at the end of the year, the conference championship in Atlanta, Georgia at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And I am going to have a little bit of craziness in mind, so we'll hold off on that for now. But Maddie, who do you have meeting up in Atlanta?
This might be a hot take, but I have Texas and Ole Miss. first off, we've got Texas with Quinn Ewers, and then wide receiver Isaiah Bond, and defensive lineman Kelvin Banks Jr. Great talent on both sides of the football there. I'm a really huge fan of their head coach, Steve Sarkisian. He utilized the transfer portal a lot this past offseason after a loss of wide receivers to the NFL. He got Isaiah Bond from Alabama, Matthew Golden from Houston, and Silas Bolden from Oregon. And last season, Ewers completed 24 out of 38 passes for over 3,400 yards with 22 touchdowns. If he can boost those yardage numbers up at least 200 to 400, then we're looking at a guy who is in the position to be a championship quarterback.
Yeah, and maybe even a Heisman contender. I like this Texas team a lot.
Yeah.
I have them in my game as well, so I'll talk about them a little bit more in just a minute. But who do you have matching up with Texas?
Ole Miss. So Lane Kiffin has been putting up double-digit numbers with the transfer portal. He's got a very aggressive staff approach, and a lot of people might be comprehensive to his use of the transfer portal, but I am personally a fan for utilizing the talent that we have, as well as including and focusing on our high school recruits. But I think the transfer portal could work in his favor, as he's getting a lot of talent from different teams who are willing to put in the work. And I think they've got really good team chemistry. They've got Jackson Dart. He's really good in the pocket. He's very accurate, and I think they would be a good matchup for Texas.
Yeah, I think they could definitely make it there. You mentioned Jackson Dart, one of the more experienced quarterbacks in this conference. Definitely a lot of upside for him. The transfer portal is really the big thing with Ole Miss. Can these transfer guys gel and really make a cohesive team unit? I'm a bit worried about that, honestly. The talent's great, though. There's no denying that. A&M's Walter Nolan, Florida's Princely Uman Mielen. On the offensive side, brought in Juice Wells to play receiver. So much transfer talent brought into this team. Didn't even mention Arkansas transfer Chris Paul at linebacker, another great player. So I would love to see that matchup. I think that'd be two very high-flying offenses going up against each other.
And they're not playing Alabama this year, so
yeah.
they have
No, Alabama's always good.
Yeah.
Yes.
But honorable mention, Alabama, I do not think will make it to a playoff game this year.
Really? I think they barely sneak in the back. I actually have Georgia missing my playoff, which might be even crazier. But as far as my SEC championship game, I am going with the Missouri Tigers to beat the Texas Longhorns. And stay with me, everyone, here, because Missouri is a very, very good team coming in this year. You saw the Missouri team last year, and they kept most of that talent. Brady Cook is back, although Cody Schrader has gone to the NFL, where he got cut, by the way. They are replacing him with Georgia State transfer Marcus Carroll and App State transfer Nate Noel. Both were exceptional at their previous stops. Basically, all the receivers are back. Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, and Marquise Johnson. Both tight ends are back. The offensive line that was a midseason contender and a semifinalist for the Joe Moore Award brings 3 of its 5 starters back, with 2 experienced transfers filling those holes. Johnny Walker Jr. is an elite edge rusher on the defensive side. I think you're going to see a lot out of him stepping into that Darius Robinson role and picking up the slack there. Also, Georgia transfer Darius Smith coming in off the edge, maybe also in that joker role for Missouri. I think you could see great pressure from him. Michigan State, Zion Young. There's so much transfer talent in this front 7 especially. The one area I would be concerned about is the secondary. Losing both Ennis Rakestraw and Chris Abrams-Drain to the NFL, your top 2 corners, is never ideal, but you are replacing them with talent. Drayden Norwood started a lot last year as Rakestraw was hurt. Dalen Carnell is one of the best slot corner linebacker hybrids in the nation. He's going to be incredible. And then brought in Clemson transfer Toriano Pride Jr. to play the opposite side at corner. So I like this Missouri team a lot. I think it's a team that we saw what they could do last year. They won the Cotton Bowl and went 11-2, and they only really got better in the offseason. So I would expect them to make a jump. And you look at their schedule too. Their only difficult games are at Alabama and Oklahoma at home. The rest of it is honestly fairly easy, and I think it lines up well for them. But I have them playing Texas. We already mentioned Texas a little bit. You mentioned the transfer talent, especially Isaiah Bond. Deep speed on the outside with Isaiah Bond. Really good deep threat. I think that pairing with Quinn Ewers' deep ball is going to be very, very good. I like this offense. Little concerned about the defense. Some of the talent you lost to the NFL in Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat especially. But we'll see how Texas bounces back. And that's kind of it for our SEC championship game predictions, but we're going to give you some more game picks as we head into week 1 after such a long offseason wait. I'm so excited week 1 is back. I'm ready for football, and we've got a great SEC slate this weekend. You know how college football scheduling is with the big SEC teams playing big games week 1. And the first of those is Clemson versus Georgia at a neutral site in Atlanta. Heavy quotations on neutral site. They're a lot closer to Athens than Clemson,
Yes.
South Carolina. But Maddie, who do you have coming out on top in that one?
I'm going to have to go with Georgia. Clemson is heading into the season with primarily the same talent that they used last year. Nothing wrong with that, but like I said, I love when coaches utilize the transfer portal, bringing in talent from different teams, playing with their members, seeing who fits in that spot. I don't think this is going to be an easy game for Georgia. Dabo Swinney could become a force and rewrite the stigma on not using the transfer portal on the other side of this if they do make it out on top. But I feel like it'll be a good matchup. One of my favorite players on this Clemson defense is Peter Woods.
Yes,
I
great
think he
player.
can really shake up the Georgia offense, throw them off. He's made great plays, a great playmaker, so really excited to see what he does week 1.
Yeah, I don't hate that pick at all. Obviously, Georgia's a great team. We know what Georgia is, but I might have spoiled this a bit earlier, but I'm taking Clemson this weekend. You mentioned Clemson is working with a lot of the same talent. Well, I don't think that continuity is a bad thing. I like this talent on the Clemson defense. Had true freshmen play the most snaps of any Division I team in college football last season, and I think they're really going to reap the benefits of that this year. Cade Klubnik in his second year under offensive coordinator Garrett Riley, I think that continuity is big for him especially. And then I think they have a dark horse Heisman contender, honestly, in running back with Phil Maffa. He is an elite player. This defense should be a top defense in college football. I love the D-line, love the front seven. The athleticism of Barrett Carter at the linebacker spot is outstanding. You mentioned Peter Woods. There's so much talent on this Clemson team, and I know it's a bit cliche, but I think Clemson does things the right way a bit more than Georgia, and I like Dabo Swinney's coaching style. I think the talent on Clemson is definitely good enough to slow this Georgia offense down, and if you can get in a low-scoring game, I think that favors Clemson, so I'm going to take the Tigers.
I do think Garrett Riley's developed and creative offense with Clemson will put up a fight for these Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, obviously, this week. That is a noon Eastern kickoff in Atlanta. Next up, a 3:30 kickoff in Gainesville, Florida, as the Miami Hurricanes travel down to take on the Florida Gators. So, who are you going with for that?
Well, when I was thinking about this game, I had to ask myself, how will Cam Ward handle the swamp? I think he's an excellent quarterback. Once again, has that great physical build, very accurate with his arm. But the swamp, that environment is just unlike any other. Those conditions are crazy. And I think if Miami's pass rush can take over the game, that they do have a good chance. But I'm going to have to say Florida's going to take this one.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot, and spoiler, I did grow up a Florida fan, so slight bias here, I will admit, but I am taking Florida here. I've already mentioned everything I like about this Florida team earlier with our surprise teams. Miami, I think, is a really good team as well. The Miami offense, I think, is the best offense in the ACC, honestly. Elite talent. One of the best offensive lines in the country, Xavier Restrepo, incredible receiver. Oregon State transfer Damian Martinez, we mentioned Cam Ward already. The defense is solid as well. Chris Blair off the edge, I think, is an incredible player. I don't love the secondary for this Miami team, though. I think Graham Mertz and these Florida receivers are going to be able to take advantage of that secondary, and you mentioned the swamp. It's one of the toughest places to play in college football for the opposing teams, and I think that crowd is really going to carry Florida to a Week 1 victory that, honestly, with the way this program is right now, they desperately need it. So
yes.
We'll have to see if the crowd can carry the Gators. But next up is the 7:30 Eastern kickoff between Notre Dame and Texas A&M at Kyle Field at Texas A&M. So who do you think comes out on top here?
On paper, Notre Dame does have this slight advantage with the Texas A&M shifts in staff, so I do think they will take the victory this weekend at College Station. You've got experienced quarterback Riley Leonard, running back Jeremiah Love, and I do think Notre Dame maximizes a lot of players on their offense. And with Notre Dame, you have 7 out of the 11 defense starters coming back, and they're all grad students, which is huge on a defensive line. Up up against this Texas A&M offense.
Yeah, you mentioned the Notre Dame experience. I like that a lot for this team, and it really starts at the quarterback position with Riley Leonard, and I think he's going to be able to lead this team to victory. I am taking Notre Dame, and I think you're going to see a lot of the Notre Dame defense this week. I think cornerback Benjamin Morrison is going to have Connor Weigman seeing ghosts a little bit, even in his own stadium. I think you could see a pick from Morrison this weekend. And then I love this Notre Dame offensive line. I love Jeremiah Love, funny enough. And the receiver core is really where I start to have questions. You brought in Bo Collins from Clemson. Out of that, I'm a little worried about the talent. Obviously, losing Rico Flores to UCLA, not great over the offseason. But I think this defense will be more than good enough. I think, honestly, both these teams come in slightly overrated at 7th and 20th. But we'll see what happens as the year plays out. But at least for week 1, I'm taking Notre Dame. Then our final game we have on the picks this week is a Sunday night game in Vegas between USC and LSU. So, Maddie, who do you think comes out on top between the Tigers and the Trojans in Vegas?
I'm going to have to go with the Tigers. You have this quarterback duel between Miller Moss and Garrett Nussmeier, both sat behind Heisman quarterbacks. So just wondering who's going to capitalize on those big plays. But when we look at the issues between USC and LSU, it's all going to come down to defense. Both defenses allowed 6 yards of play on average last season, which is kind of unheard of for SEC football. But what I'm really excited to see is offensive coordinator Joe Sloan. He did help develop Jaden Daniels, as well as this season's starting quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier. His background as a 2-year quarterback coach, I think, will play a huge role into how their offense is run this year. I love a good quarterback-focused offensive coordinator. I think starting with the quarterback and making sure everything is secure there makes for just a very smooth offense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm also going LSU. I'm not super high on Garrett Nussmeier, but I think the USC defense is abysmal. I think most quarterbacks could have reasonable success versus this USC defense. And if you look at recent history, I mean, name a worse duo than USC in primetime kickoff games. It feels like every time they're in one of these, they get absolutely curb stomped. I don't think it's that bad, but I think LSU wins this fairly convincingly. I like the LSU offensive talent. 2 of the best offensive tackles in college football. I think Will Campbell will probably be a top 5 pick in this year's NFL draft. And then Emory Jones Jr. on the other side is just a freak athlete, maybe less of a technician, but still has incredible talent over there on the right side. Then on defense, will we finally see an elite Harold Perkins this year? I hope they kind of let him get him settled into his own role rather than moving him around a ton, because I think you're really stunting his development by not being sure what you want to do with him. Just let him settle in, get after it. I think you're going to see the best version of Harold Perkins if you do that. So I'm also taking LSU. But that is it for this week on Around the SEC. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see what happens with these week 1 picks. We'll be back next week to recap them and give you guys a preview of week 2. And also next week, I will be joined by Jaden Eccles, so look forward to that. But for this week, I'm Micah Farmer.
I'm Maddie Bond.
And this has been Around the SEC.